Today, the name Donald Trump is associated with the world's most powerful man, the 45th and 47th President of the United States. But before 2015, when he announced his run for office, and even decades before then, Donald Trump was already known as one of the most famous businessmen, hotel owners, and real estate developers in the United States. Outside of high-rises, hospitality venues, and hosting The Apprentice, Donald Trump moved and mixed in some of the most influential and elitist crowds in New York City and Florida. They say it's who you know, and back in the 80s and 90s, Trump knew a lot of people, among them Jeffrey Epstein. Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein first met in the 1980s in New York. While Trump said that he spent time with Epsteins at parties, he has vehemently denied having any involvement or knowledge of Epstein's criminal sex trafficking ring. Late 90s, early 2000s, when Donald Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, do you think within the community that he was hanging out with that it was quite a well-known thing what Jeffrey Epstein was up to? Or do you think it's a situation where people were just turning a blind eye to it?
This is a great question, and something that I don't think we really know exactly how much Trump or other people knew about Epstein being a pedophile at the time. I mean, he wouldn't face criminal charges until a few years later. So I think there is some plausible deniability on their part. On the other hand, we know that Trump wrote a birthday letter to Jeffrey Epstein where they talk about secrets, they talk about youth. And of course, Trump made this illustration of a nude woman and signed his name. And so one wonders, what exactly was going on there with their relationship? And I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions.
How did they originally cross paths?
They knew each other from sort of Manhattan social circles. They were both very rich men, obviously both very interested in women. And so, from there, Epstein would go to Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. And so they hung out with each other a lot, and they were clearly good friends.
What was Donald Trump's relationship like with Ghislaine Maxwell?
I don't think they were particularly tight, but they obviously mixed in the same social circles, which she was very much a centre of. So they were friendly, if not best buddies.
In 2002, Donald Trump praised Epstein as a terrific guy to New York Magazine. But just a few years later, the relationship reportedly soured, and Jeffrey Epstein was no longer allowed at Mar-a-Lago Resort. When Virginia Giuffre's book was published posthumously this year, she detailed that she first met Ghislaine Maxwell in Florida at none other than Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, something Trump confirmed while speaking to reporters about his fallout with Epstein.
Mar-a-Lago, you're saying that Jeffrey Epstein poached two of your staffers? Who were they?
I don't want to say two, or I don't want to say any number. You're talking about many years ago. But yeah, he took people, and because he took people, I said, don't do it anymore. They work for me. And he took... beyond that, he took some others. And once he did that, that was the end of him.
Were some of them young women?
Well, I don't want to say, but everyone knows the people that were taken.
Trump commented on this in July. He said that Epstein stole her when she was working at the Mar-a-Lago resort. Has the president said anything prior to this about this connection? Because it's a pretty insane connection to think that Epstein's most notable victim, the reason how she came into this situation, this dark situation that would shape the rest of her life, was from meeting Ghislaine Maxwell at Donald Trump's resort.
I mean, this friendship between Trump and Epstein is incredibly interesting, and lots of people have looked into it. And I will say, I don't think it's the end of the media coverage of that relationship. And I know several journalists are looking into it, and reports are about to come out. But she was working at Mar-a-Lago, and Trump had never really addressed or acknowledged Virginia. So it was kind of this candid moment on Air Force One where he's just kind of, as an aside, asked, why did you fall out with Epstein? And sometimes these questions feel silly to even ask, because, the White House could kind of gone on the record before of saying, Trump and Epstein were friends, but they broke up over, or they fell out over, the line then was that one of Mar-a-Lago's members Epstein was trying on with one of the Mar-a-Lago members' daughters, and Trump and the management of Mar-a-Lago thought that was incredibly inappropriate and kicked him out. That was sort of the official story, and that was 2007. And that was sort of the always official account of how the two of them fell out. So this was the president saying in 2000, so 7 years earlier, that he fell out with Epstein because he stole. I mean, he used the word stole, which I'll get to in a minute, but that he stole female spa attendants, and then someone said, does this include Virginia? And he said, yes, it includes Virginia. And it was sort of the first time he'd acknowledged her. And I spoke to the family after this quote, and they were incredibly hurt and upset by the phrasing of this, that that their sister was not stolen, she was not property, she was not a material, she wasn't cattle, she was trafficked at a young age, and she was just 16 years old at this time. And so I think that they hadn't really done much media at that point, and then when they heard the president saying that, I think it kind of sparked them into a public campaign of defending their sister. So we have Trump and Epstein on the party scene in New York and in Florida. I mean, they both have homes very close to each other in both places, and they're partying, and there's several connections with the modeling world, and they're attending certain parties, and there are some deep connections there. I mean, I think it's still to be explored how far they go. I mean, some women have come forward publicly to allege that they were assaulted by both Epstein and Trump. There's at least one or two of those women. So I think there's still some accusations to come forward about that relationship.
You mentioned the word stole, because I think that is an interesting take from the family of Virginia Giuffre, because my thought is, when I heard him say stole, I thought, does that mean that you knew that she was being trafficked under your watch, essentially?
Well, that's the same question that the family asked. I mean, so what's very interesting is that what was revealed in the book, it did nothing to kind of, Virginia never accused Trump of any wrongdoing. She never in her lifetime accused him of that, and she never saw Trump abusing any women or young girls while she was there. She voted for Trump. She thought, he is going to be the man to release the files, and she really did believe that. But what was interesting in the book is what came out is that Trump actually had a personal meeting with Virginia. So what's interesting is, he's the head of this huge sprawling resort with hundreds and hundreds of employees, and yet he has the time to meet this, new 16-year-old girl who's probably the lowest in the food chain of the entire spa and resort, who's kind of in week 2 of her job, and her dad introduces her to Trump, and Trump says to her, oh, do you like kids? And she says, yes, why? And he's asking her to kind of babysit for some of his friends' kids who live, either nearby Mar-a-Lago or live in the resort. And so she starts babysitting for his friends. So these connections, they go back quite some way, and there's some sense of the familiarity that Trump and Epstein have. And another allegation in the book is that Virginia's father, who's obviously the maintenance man at Mar-a-Lago, around the time that Virginia began to be trafficked to Epstein, her dad was paid $30,000 in what we think was a wire from Epstein. This is when Virginia kind of started to question how much her family knew about what was happening to her, and whether he was aware of what was happening to her, and this was sort of, she describes it as being potential hush money. And that allegation is so horrific to her that she actually breaks off contact with her dad at that point. And this is something that was told to her by law enforcement officers years later after it happened.
Donald Trump had promised that if he were elected president for a second time, he would release all documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, something Republicans say the Biden administration had failed to do. A few months into his second presidency, pressure mounted on his administration, including from within it, to release any names and information related to the Epstein Files, which were in the hands of the Department of Justice and FBI. But when the White House backflipped on making it public, A lewd 50th birthday letter sent from Trump to Epstein was published, and old emails surfaced. Questions were raised if the president was hiding something. So the White House has obviously attempted to, I guess, downplay the relationship they had when they were in their peak. It's been made clear that they did have a public fallout during the early 2000s, but we're seeing now this, signed birthday letter, but they're still claiming that, the relationship wasn't as strong as perhaps that these things would make them out to be. But what's your interpretation on it, Will? Were they periphery friends? Were they New York socialite friends where you see each other at events? Or do you think they actually were close friends?
I think they appear to have been close friends. Trump is writing birthday letters to Epstein, or one birthday letter about sharing a secret. They were, filmed and videotaped together. This doesn't seem to be someone who he sort of brushed up against, or Epstein said, "Hey, let's pose for a picture one time." They knew each other. Again, Trump was quoted as sort of an expert on Epstein's background, and so they ultimately did have a falling out, but again, we don't really know the details of the falling out. At one point, the Trump administration has claimed that it was a fallout over a real estate deal. At another, Trump said, well, Epstein stole one of my employees from Mar-a-Lago, which is interesting because we know Virginia Giuffre was at Mar-a-Lago. One of Epstein's victims was at Mar-a-Lago when she sort of fell into Epstein's orbit. So one wonders, Trump had sort of a weird possessiveness about the idea of Epstein stealing his employees. So it's a very strange relationship.
Do you think these historical connections between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein is in any way related to why there has been such a delay in the release of these Epstein files?
Yeah, I think saying a delay might be optimistic. We may never get them at this point. The Epstein files are sort of a catch-all term for a sprawling amount of interview material and videos and all these other documents that were collected as part of the FBI's Epstein investigations. And what we know has been reported by the Wall Street Journal and others is that Donald Trump's name comes up in those files. Now, it might be relatively innocuous because, of course, we know he was friends with Epstein. So maybe there's nothing criminal here. But I think it's fair to say there's probably more things that are embarrassing to Trump in it. Like, for example, the birthday letter that the administration claimed for so long was fake that ultimately emerged. So there may be embarrassing references to Trump. There may also be references to his wealthy friends, his mutual friends with Epstein. And I think it's pretty clear that is why Donald Trump is not allowing these files to come out, because for so many years, the Trump movement, the Republican Party, said, we want the files. The files are so important. And all of a sudden, Trump is told his name is in the files. And soon after that, last summer, then suddenly the files aren't coming out anymore.
In March, we saw Attorney General Pam Bondi promise the American people that they would get a full client list, that she had these files on her desk, that she was about to start going through them. And then that resulted in a major U-turn from her. She's already faced a congressional hearing, spoke about this. But what can you tell us, Will, about this White House flip-flopping?
It's been the White House flip-flop has been very abrupt. We saw Kash Patel, now the FBI director. Before he was FBI director, he said the FBI has the client list. They need to release it. We saw J.D. Vance, now the vice president, saying, we need to put these files out there. And of course, Pam Bondi was claiming, even after becoming attorney general, that she had the client list. She had all these files. But there really has been very little that's been released. I think what happened, and I think this is based on reporting that's by the Wall Street Journal and others, is that the Trump campaign was happy to use this as a campaign issue, but then they get in office and they realize that a lot of this material may mention Donald Trump, or at least some of it. Trump is told this, and he doesn't want that to come out. And so he says, don't put it out there. And so that explains the really abrupt about face from the Trump administration, and one that obviously has created a lot of political problems for Trump in America.
Trump, he made this campaign promise, Josie, that he would release these Epstein files. Why do you think he hasn't done that? And do you believe the DOJ when they say, well, there really isn't any files? We thought there may have been, but there really isn't.
So this is all, so Trump campaigned on this. It was all part of his sort of draining of the swamp pledge. It was a signal to voters that he's this outsider fighting the deep state, and that he's going to expose this Democrat-led pedophile cabal, which is, a hugely galvanizing issue for like the meat of his base. And then he got access to it. He was in power, and he appointed, his own former personal lawyer, Todd Blanche, to be the Deputy Attorney General. Pam Bondi, who represented him in several of his own cases, becomes the Attorney General. Kash Patel, who kind of trafficked in a lot of these rumors about Epstein, is suddenly the FBI director. These are people who, in their own lives before the administration, were pushing for these files to be released, and then suddenly we hear in July in a memo, just sort of quietly released on a Sunday night, that everything's fine, it's closed, nothing to see here. And this is obviously very odd, because at the same time, Pam Bondi is saying that, we've identified 1,000 women, 1,000 victims. Each of them have given, not each of them, but many of them have given testimony, whether to their own lawyers, to the FBI. I've spoken to many victims over the years, and they said, I've spoken to the FBI, this is in their files, I gave them the contact details for all these other women that this happened to, and for some of them, like, the FBI just never got back to them.
While Donald Trump tried to shape his first year back in office around tackling immigration, improving the economy and solving global conflicts, he was plagued by his association with Jeffrey Epstein. The White House attempted various tactics to throw the media off the Epstein headlines, but as oversight Democrats began to drip-feed documents to the public, it became harder and harder. By mid-2025, it was clear the Epstein Files were becoming a stain on Donald Trump's first term back in office. But it wasn't just Democrats or Trump critics wanting answers. Cracks started forming within the Republican Party, with MAGA voters and QAnon believers demanding transparency. There's also a lot of conversation about whether the Epstein list even exists. So there could be Epstein Files, but there might not be an actual client list. So, Will, from your I guess research and reporting on this, do you think there is a list, or at the very least, do you think the DOJ know which high-profile people were involved in this criminality?
Sure, I think that there is, from lawyers who have been involved in the case, from reporters who have covered it, there's a sense that there isn't, there's one golden list or a file to be found somewhere. But that the files list people, they list Epstein friends, they list his associates in a way that effectively amounts to a list, or that you could create your own list based on the evidence in it. Essentially, the Trump administration has made various claims. They've said there isn't a list when they initially closed the case in July, but at the same time, and they said, Epstein was not blackmailing people. But then you've also seen Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who also knew Epstein and is close with Trump. He came out and said, Epstein was blackmailing people. He had all this material on people. So if that material exists, that's the client list, essentially.
During the 2024 campaign, Will, we obviously saw Donald Trump saying that he would declassify any Epstein files that he gets his hands on. So do you think that this was just a tactic to get him into office, knowing that there was a chance that he could be named and that he never really intended to release any of it?
It's hard to know how aware Trump was of what a big campaign issue this was for both the MAGA base, and I think a lot of independents who are also understandably troubled by the unanswered questions in the Epstein case. People like Kash Patel, J.D. Vance were much more forward in terms of talking about the files. Trump has always had kind of a weird relationship. He's spoken very positively about Epstein's associate and sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. Even before he was in office, he was asked, what do you make of Ghislaine Maxwell? You guys had this connection. And he says, well, I wish her well, which is obviously a bizarre thing to say. This was after she was convicted. So it seems as though perhaps he never planned to release the files. Maybe he didn't realize how much his name came up, if it does. But there certainly was a very strange turn from the administration after he was told that his name was in the files.
So what exactly about the Epstein files riles up Trump supporters so much?
I think the Epstein files are interesting to Republicans for a couple reasons. One is I think there are a lot of legitimate questions about what was going on there, who Epstein was friends with, how he achieved this prominence and this wealth. On the other hand, I also think Republicans have become convinced, or at least had become convinced until Trump told them to stop caring about it, that this mythical client list was going to include a lot of Democrats on it. That basically, and this dovetails with the QAnon conspiracy theory that Democrats are in this kind of pedophile satanic cabal. And that was kind of a fantasy for them, this idea that all of their political and cultural foes would be exposed, not just as wrong-headed or mean, but as pedophiles and sort of erased from public life. And so that was what all the excitement was about. And so then for Donald Trump to say, when he initially said, we're not releasing it, and started sort of insulting his supporters who believed in it, I think there was they felt like daddy was taking away their toys, essentially. And only in the weeks that would follow would they start to realize, wait, Trump might be implicated here too. And then they would start to kind of cool on their demands that the files be released.
Well, in delaying the release, do you think that there's a chance that QAnon believers are going to start fully turning on Trump, or already have?
I mean, Trump is really at the core of QAnon and a lot of these related conspiracy theories. They see him as sort of an avenging angel, a messianic figure who, they believe that the world is in the grips of this satanic pedophile cabal and that Trump alone can stop them. So on one hand, it's hard for me to imagine them taking Trump out of their belief system in that way. On the other, I do think a lot of conspiracy theorists may cool to Trump. They may become a little alienated from him. It is difficult. I mean, these are people who believe that, I think in a way, understandably, that Jeffrey Epstein was sort of the ringleader of this pedophile organization. And then to have Donald Trump say, we're not going to release any information on it, essentially he might be implicated. I think that's difficult for people to swallow.
Do you think Trump is now part of this elite group of people that QAnon are so vehemently against, given that Trump no longer is backing the release of the Epstein Files?
It's always been odd that Trump was portrayed as the guy who was really going to get to the bottom of the Epstein case because he was so close with Epstein. On the other hand, for at least a few years, QAnon believers and other Trump supporters could tell themselves, well, maybe he had a falling out with Epstein after it became public that Epstein was a pedophile. Or that maybe Trump, he's in all these videos with Epstein. He's appointing the federal prosecutor who gave Epstein a sweetheart deal to a cabinet post. Maybe all of this was because Trump is taking Epstein down from the inside. He was hanging out with him at parties to learn his evil ways and help the FBI. But in fact, I think this has become a real kind of crucial moment where people have started to realize that, really, at least as long as Donald Trump is in office, those answers are not going to come out.
The White House's desire to move on from the Epstein saga fell flat when a fellow Republican lawmaker, Thomas Massey, introduced a discharge petition to force a House floor vote on a bill requiring the release of all Justice Department files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Tensions within the party grew as several Republicans went against the president by supporting the bill, including long-standing ally Marjorie Taylor Greene. The 218th signature, the final one needed to force a vote, was secured when Adelita Grijalva won her Arizona congressional race. But it sparked an alleged stonewalling attempt from Mike Johnson, who placed the House on recess and took 50 days to swear her in, leading to a suspicious delay on the vote.
I mean, clearly Donald Trump's name is in there because he was so friendly with Epstein. I mean, there are various allegations from the Maxwell's victims to say that he was present at parties where there were underage girls. There was no allegation that he actually did anything with them, but he must have known what was going on, as did the others.
Donald Trump, he dismissed the continued interest in the Epstein Files. He says it's pretty boring stuff. Why do you think he would say that?
Because his names are all over the files. That's why he doesn't... he's, if not directly implicated, he's tainted by his friendship with Epstein.
Do you think he's doing enough to push away attention from this?
It's going to be very difficult to keep the attention away from this because it's the gift that keeps on giving.
I mean, they have no idea what happened to this stuff. So at the very least, the files include, the testimonies that these women gave, and we're seeing some of them coming out now. The documents that the Congressional Oversight Committee in the House has. So we're seeing this kind of drip of information, and we know, the Epstein estate is handing over some of them as part of subpoenas, and we know, I mean, again, the DOJ said that they have, God, don't quote me, I think it was like 5 terabytes or megabytes or something of data, which equals about 3 million documents. And so far, if that's true, so far they've released less than 0.5% of that. So, to say that there's nothing in there and that no one else is implicated is just patently untrue.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, he previously had pleaded with Trump to release these Epstein files, but now he is the one who has basically avoided swearing in a newly elected Democratic Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva in an apparent bid to avoid a vote on releasing these files because she's supposedly the 218th signature to release them. So can you explain what is going on there?
So Mike Johnson he has to hold the dam together. He has to prevent Democrats and a handful of Republicans from uniting to pass a resolution to release the Epstein files. And because this was such a key, typically you wouldn't see Republicans and Democrats working together, but because this was such a key issue for a lot of Republican voters, you've seen a couple of Republican defections, people like Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, sort of the famous QAnon congresswoman. And so they have teamed up with Democrats, but Democrats are short. The coalition trying to pass this resolution is short one vote. Now, they technically have that vote because they have a member of Congress who was elected after the person holding that seat died. She was elected in a special election. But Mike Johnson is refusing to seat her. It's very unusual. He's not bringing the House back, so there's no process for her to be seated. He initially closed Congress early in August to avoid one vote on this. Now he managed to get some Republicans to get off to not support it, but now he's keeping the House out, apparently, I would say, in an effort to avoid seating this Congresswoman who would put the resolution over the line and have it pass.
Well, we've seen Donald Trump being heavily criticized by his own MAGA supporters who have been calling for these files to be released alongside Donald Trump when he was, as you mentioned, campaigning on this, and now seeing this flip in gears from him saying that there's nothing there, they're not going to release anything, like let's stop talking about Jeffrey Epstein. How do you think this has impacted him in front of his own party?
It's a small number, but several prominent Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nancy Mace have broken ranks to back this kind of Democrat proposal to release the Epstein documents. That's a big deal in itself. It's just that the number, I think it's 4, possibly 5 Republicans have broken ranks with Trump on this issue because it's so motivating to Trump voters, to Republicans. And interestingly, it's kind of the hardest core of the MAGA base that cares about this the most. So Trump knows how damaging it is, A, to kind of close the files and not release any of them, and B, this sort of plan that might be in the motion to commute Ghislaine's sentence or pardon her even. What I would say is that this core that I'm talking about, they're hardcore Trump voters, and they never seek to kind of publicly hold Trump accountable for these decisions. So I don't think he'll ever be directly harmed by whatever happens. I mean, you see people like Pam Bondi and Kash Patel getting scapegoated, and the approval ratings of Bondi and Patel are just slumping, where you see Trump, not so personally affected by it. So I think that he's sort of firewalled from a lot of this criticism.
Do you think he will be called to testify in front of a House committee? We've seen obviously Kash Patel and Pam Bondi have to do their own have to testify as well. Do you think Trump will be called to do it?
I'm sure the Democrats would love to subpoena Trump and make him appear before the committee, but I don't imagine the Republicans would ever entertain that.
In November, Donald Trump surprised the world when he signed an executive order directing the Department of Justice to review and release any documents relating to Jeffrey Epstein within 30 days. The deadline expires on Friday, December 19. Because Jeffrey Epstein died in prison, Ghislaine Maxwell is the only one that's ever been convicted of these sex trafficking charges. Do you think other people will start to be charged going forward?
Well, it does seem rather unfair that she's the only person that suffered in this, when we know there are other very high-profile people involved. They've settled the situation in Washington at the moment. There is a new congresswoman. Once she's sworn in, she says she will support the bill to release all the Epstein files. And there should be some interesting stuff in there.
Does Congress investigating Jeffrey Epstein give you or of your victims any hope?
Definitely. If they, the more that the public talks about it, the more that people in Congress talk about it, it definitely gives us hope, because it makes our victims feel like, we're not forgotten. Another element of Epstein dying is that this could potentially just be pushed aside and forgotten because he's gone. There's no trial. There's no intense investigation. So I think that it gives us hope that potentially more helpful information will be made public.
What about these Epstein files? Do you and the victims believe that perhaps the Republican Party is stonewalling releasing them? Is there more in this that they want to come out to the public?
I mean, I know that there's been bipartisan support for releasing the Epstein files. So I don't necessarily think any side is stonewalling. I do believe that the files should be fully released. They should have been released a while ago. I'm hoping again that our institutional bodies in America listen to the public demand for the release of the files and for transparency. So if there is any holdup or stonewalling, I do hope that, the voices of the public really ring clear, and that our institutions and governments, which are in place to serve the public and the people who elected them, listen and they release whatever information they have.
30 days after a presidential promise, the world now waits. And as the clock runs down, anyone who crossed paths with Epstein may be bracing for scrutiny, while survivors and their advocates hope greater transparency will finally bring accountability. On the next episode of Hidden in Plain Sight, the Epstein Files, we'll follow the fallout, what's released, what's withheld, and who is called to account.